She was standing there, dress half open, zipper stuck, and she didn't scream. Didn't grab a towel. Didn't slam the door in his face. She turned around, looked James Calloway dead in the eyes, and said, "Well, now you have to take responsibility." He hadn't said a word, hadn't moved. A man who'd survived enemy waters and a gutting divorce completely destroyed by one sentence from a woman he'd known for 11 days. And the worst part, she was smiling, like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. If you're new here, subscribe. You won't believe where this goes. The wrench hit the floor at 6:14 in the morning. James Calloway knew the exact time because he had been watching the clock above the workbench since 5:47, ever since he heard Noah coughing again in the back bedroom. He had gone in twice already, checked his forehead, brought water, said the things a father says when he doesn't know what else to do. "You're okay, bud. I got you. Go back to sleep." Noah had looked up at him with those big gray eyes. His mother's eyes, a fact that still hit James somewhere under the sternum every single time, and said, "Dad, your hands smell like gasoline." "Yeah, it's okay. I don't mind." James had stood there in the dark for a long moment, watching his son fall back asleep, like it was nothing, like the world was perfectly safe, like there was nothing to worry about because his dad was there. And then he had gone back to the workshop and thrown the wrench, because that kind of trust, quiet, absolute, completely unearned, was the one thing he had never figured out how to carry. It was a Wednesday in early April. The lake was still gray. The town of Deering Falls, New York was still barely awake, which was the way James preferred it. He had chosen this place specifically because nothing happened here. Boats came in broken. He fixed them. He sent them back out. Nobody asked too many questions. Nobody expected too much. That was the deal he had made with himself after the divorce, after the Navy, after all of it. Keep things simple. Keep things manageable. Don't let anything in that you can't repair. He picked the wrench up off the floor, set it on the pegboard where it belonged, and went inside to make Noah's breakfast. By 8 o'clock, Noah was on the school bus, and James was back in the workshop with his second cup of coffee, lying under the hull of a 1987 Starcraft that a guy named Peterson had brought in 3 weeks ago, claiming it just needed a little work. It needed more than a little work. The bilge was corroded, the transom had soft spots, and somebody at some point had tried to patch the fiberglass with what appeared to be automotive body filler and wishful thinking. James had seen worse. He had fixed worse. He didn't mind. Worse meant more time. More time meant less thinking. That was the other deal he had made with himself. He heard the moving truck before he saw it. Big diesel engine air brakes, the particular rumble of something large navigating a residential road, too narrow for it. He didn't bother coming out from under the Starcraft. People moved in and out of this neighborhood. It wasn't his business. The property next door had been empty for 4 months since old Walt Grover had gone to live with his daughter in Raleigh. Fine man. Never bothered anyone. James had mowed his grass twice without being asked, and Walt had left a 6-pack of Yuengling on his porch without a note. Perfect arrangement. He heard doors, voices, the mechanical groan of a ramp being lowered, then silence. Then about 20 minutes later, he heard footsteps on the concrete outside his workshop door, and a voice said, "I didn't want to knock. You looked busy." James rolled out from under the hull. She was standing about 4 feet back from the open doorway, not inside which he noticed immediately. Respecting the threshold. She was holding 2 paper cups of coffee from Denny's down the road, he could tell by the logo, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately classify. Not nervous, not aggressively friendly, not the careful performed smile of someone trying to make a good first impression, just calm, attentive, like she had done this before and wasn't worried about how it would go. "I'm your new neighbor," she said. "Renee Maddox. I figured coffee was a better introduction than a casserole." He stood up, wiped his hands on the rag tucked through his belt. "James Calloway." "I know." She held out one of the cups. "The guy at the marina told me. He said you fix everything that comes through this end of the lake." James took the coffee. He didn't say anything for a moment. He was running a passive assessment the way he always did. Old habit from the Navy, the kind of thing that became automatic after enough years taking in the small details. Her car was a dark blue Subaru Outback, 5 or 6 years old. Pragmatic choice. She was dressed simply. No jewelry except small earrings. Her shoes had mud on them already, which meant she had walked the property line before coming to find him, which meant she was either practical or curious, or both. She didn't seem to need him to fill the silence. That was the thing he noticed most. "Thanks for the coffee," he said. "Of course." She glanced past him at the boat on the stand. "What happened to it?" "Previous owner happened to it." She almost smiled. "Is it survivable?" "Most things are." She looked at him for just a half-second longer, then was strictly conversational, and then she said, "Good to know," and walked back toward her house. James stood in the doorway of his workshop and watched her go, and then went back to work and didn't think about it again. Or told himself he didn't. The coffee appeared again the next morning. He came out at 6:40 to unlock the workshop, and there were 2 paper cups sitting on the wooden crate he used as a step, still hot, the lids sealed. He looked next door. Her lights were on in the kitchen. He couldn't see anyone through the window. He brought 1 cup inside, left the other where it was for a moment, then brought that one in too. He didn't know why that felt like a decision. On Thursday, she was talking to Noah. James heard it before he saw it. He had been in the back of the workshop checking inventory, and he heard his son's voice outside that particular animated pitch Noah used when something had genuinely captured his attention, which was rare. Noah was a quiet kid. He had been quiet since the divorce, quieter than a 7-year-old should probably be, and James had read 2 books about children and emotional withdrawal, and had implemented approximately nothing from either of them, because every time he tried to start the conversation, he couldn't find the door. He came around the side of the workshop and saw Noah standing at the fence line talking to Renee Maddox through the gap between the posts. She was crouched down on her side, eye level with him, and she was listening. Actually listening. Not the half attention that adults usually gave children. "And the propeller had like 3 blades missing," Noah was saying. "And Dad said it looked like it went through a rock or something. But I think it went through something way worse, like maybe a submarine." "Could have been a submarine," Renee said seriously. "Right, that's what I said." "What did your dad say to that?" Noah considered. "He said submarines don't usually come this far inland." "Well, that's probably true. But technically, if the lake were connected to the right rivers..." "That's exactly what I said." Noah looked delighted. "He said I watch too much YouTube." "Smart kid," Renee said, and Noah grinned so wide it almost hurt to look at. James stood there another moment. Then he said, "Noah the bus." Noah spun around. "Dad? She thinks I could be right about the submarine." "I'm sure she does." James looked at Renee. "Sorry if he was bothering you." "He wasn't." She stood up easy and unhurried. "He was educating me about propeller damage. I learned a lot." Bye, Renee. Noah was already running for his backpack. James waited until his son was inside and then said, "He talks a lot when he gets going." "I noticed." She wasn't apologetic about having enjoyed it. "He's a good kid, James." He wasn't sure what to do with that. He nodded and went back to work. By the end of the first week, James had identified 6 distinct things about Renee Maddox that he couldn't entirely explain, and that occupied a small persistent corner of his mind, the way an odd sound in an engine occupies a mechanic not alarming exactly, but impossible to ignore. 1. She didn't overstay. Every interaction ended before it became uncomfortable. It was like she had an internal gauge he couldn't see. 2. She never asked him about himself. Not once. She talked about practical things, the property, the weather, Noah's theory about submarines, and she didn't probe. 3. She was always up before him. The lights in her kitchen were on every morning when he unlocked the workshop. He started waking up earlier to test this. The lights were still on before him. 4. She had already introduced herself to the 2 other households on their road, the Kims at the end, and old Dorothy Pierce, who hated everyone, and had apparently told Renee she was adequately tolerable, which Dorothy had never said about anyone in recorded history. 5. She brought the coffee every morning, but she never brought it inside, never waited for an invitation, never made it into a thing. 6. She smiled like she already knew how the conversation was going to go. James was not a man who made much of intuition. He had spent 22 years in the Navy being trained to trust data systems protocols. Intuition was what got people killed when they stopped cross-referencing it against observable fact. But something about Renee Maddox made him feel like he was reading a set of instruments he didn't have the manual for. He called his brother in Pennsylvania on a Friday night. His brother Gary was 51 and divorced twice and worked in HVAC and had opinions about everything. "There's a woman moved in next door," James said. "Okay," Gary said. "She brings me coffee in the morning." "Is she single?" "I didn't ask." "James, I didn't ask." "What does she look like?" "That's not the point." "It's a little the point. She talks to Noah." James paused. "She crouches down when she talks to him, like she's actually listening." Gary was quiet for a moment. "And that's got you freaked out." "I'm not freaked out. You called me on a Friday night to tell me about your neighbor's coffee man. You're freaked out." James didn't answer that. "She sounds normal," Gary said. "She sounds like a normal woman being a decent neighbor. Why are you making it a problem?" "I'm not making it a problem." "You are. You have a gift for that." Gary's voice was not unkind. "She's being nice. You don't know what to do with nice. That's the whole thing." James sat with that for a moment. "I know what to do with nice." "Name one time in the last 3 years you let somebody be nice to you without immediately figuring out their angle." He couldn't. "Right," Gary said. "Drink the coffee, James. Let the woman be your neighbor. Not everything is a threat assessment." He repeated that to himself 2 days later when he walked across the property line for the first time. He had a reason. Legitimate, practical, entirely explainable. One of his socket sets had gone missing, and the last time he remembered using it was when he had helped Noah build a birdhouse in the backyard, which was adjacent to Renee's property, and he thought maybe it had been kicked under the fence accidentally. He had looked everywhere else. It was the logical next step. He told himself that all the way to her front door. He knocked once. Nothing. He knocked again. The door swung open about 4 inches, unlatched. The latch hadn't caught, and his knock had pushed it. He stood there. Any reasonable person would have called out, confirmed she wasn't home, and come back later. That's what a reasonable person would have done. He said, "Ms. Maddox," at normal volume. No answer. He said it louder, "Renee," from somewhere inside, something that sounded like a frustrated exhale, and then, "Back here? I'm not. I just need a pause. "Hello. It's James. From next door. Your door was open. I knocked." A beat of silence. "Oh." Another beat. Could you actually come in for a second? I know that's a weird thing to ask, but I genuinely cannot." He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The entry led directly into the living room, which was still half-unpacked boxes along one wall. He followed her voice down a short hallway toward what he assumed was the bedroom. He stopped in the doorway. Renee Maddox was standing with her back to him in a dark green dress, her arms at an awkward angle, both hands reaching behind her. The zipper was stuck somewhere between her shoulder blades, and her waist pulled halfway, and she had clearly been fighting it for a while because her hair was coming loose from where it had been pinned up, and there was a particular tension in her shoulders that James recognized as the specific frustration of a stuck mechanical thing. She heard him stop. She turned her head and looked at him over her shoulder, and for a moment, just a moment, neither of them said anything. She didn't startle, didn't rush to explain or cover or apologize. She just looked at him with those calm, clear eyes, and then she tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was about to say something she'd already decided on, and she said, "Well, now you have to take responsibility." James Calloway, who had navigated the South China Sea in 15-foot swells, who had held his position under pressure that would have broken most men who had stood in a divorce attorney's office and not flinched, felt the air go completely out of him. Not in a bad way. In the way of something unexpected, landing exactly right. He walked across the room. He found the zipper pull. The mechanism had jumped the track simple fix 30 seconds, and he worked it free with the particular focus of a man who needed something to do with his hands. He stepped back. She turned around, and she was smiling. Not triumphant, not flirtatious exactly. Something older than that. something that looked more than anything like recognition. "Thank you," she said. "Your latch doesn't catch," he said. "I can fix that. I know you can." He looked at her. "I was looking for a socket set." "I know," she said. "It's in a box on the back porch. Noah left it there last week. I was going to bring it over tomorrow." He stood there for one more second. Then he said, "I'll get it." And he walked out through the living room and down the back steps and found the socket set exactly where she said it was. And he stood there in the late afternoon sun with the toolbox in his hands and the lake gray and flat in the distance. And he thought about the way she had looked at him when she turned around. Like she wasn't surprised to see him. Like she had been expecting him all along. And James Calloway, who believed that everything in life could be fixed or broken, and nothing existed in between, felt for the first time in a very long time, like a man standing in completely unfamiliar territory. He walked home. He sat at his workbench. He looked at the socket set. He did not pick up the wrench. James didn't sleep that night. He told himself it was the Starcraft. The transom repair was at a critical stage, and he had been turning over the fiberglass layup schedule in his head, which was a perfectly legitimate reason to lie awake at 11:30, staring at the ceiling with his hands folded on his chest like a man waiting for a verdict. That's what he told himself. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her turn around. That half second, the way she didn't flinch, the way she looked at him like she had already done the math on this situation and arrived at an answer he wasn't privy to. And that smile not provocative, not embarrassed, just steady. Certain. Like a woman who had been standing in that exact spot for years and had simply been waiting for him to walk through the door. Now, you have to take responsibility. He got up at midnight and went to the workshop and worked on the Starcraft until 2 a.m. and then sat on the wooden crate outside with a beer he didn't finish and looked at the dark windows of the house next door. The kitchen light was off for once. Good, he thought. That's good. She's a normal person who sleeps at normal hours and brings coffee to her neighbor because that's what decent people do in small towns. And there is absolutely nothing unusual happening here. He went back inside. Lay down, stared at the ceiling again, like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. He didn't know where that thought came from. He pushed it away. He was 44 years old, and he had enough actual problems without manufacturing new ones out of a stuck zipper, and a woman who was too calm for her own good. Noah's cough had cleared up by morning. He came to breakfast in his dinosaur shirt and ate his eggs with focused efficiency and said, "Dad, can I ask Renee if she wants to see the boat after school?" James looked up from his coffee. "Why would she want to see the boat?" "Because I told her about it. She said it sounded interesting." "You've had 3 conversations with her." 4, Noah said without looking up from his eggs. "She came over yesterday while you were under the hull. We talked about the migratory patterns of Canada geese." James put his coffee down. "She came onto the property. Just to the fence. She didn't come past the fence." Noah finally looked up. "She asked if it was okay. I said yes." A pause. "Was that okay?" James picked his coffee back up. "Yeah, that's fine." "So can she see the boat?" "I'll think about it." Noah accepted this the way he accepted most of James's non-answers, with a quiet patience that was either very mature or slightly heartbreaking depending on how James was feeling on a given day. He finished his eggs, rinsed his plate, picked up his backpack, and paused at the door. "She said you fixed boats that other people gave up on," Noah said. "She said that was a good thing to be." Then the door closed, and James sat alone in the kitchen and drank his coffee, and did not think about Renee Maddox at all. He managed that for approximately 40 minutes. She came to the fence at 10. He was outside, pressure washing the drive, and he heard her before he saw her, the particular soft sound of someone who isn't trying to announce themselves, but also isn't trying to hide. He cut the washer and turned around. She was at the fence line with her arms crossed loosely over the top rail, not leaning, just resting. She was in jeans and a gray pullover, and her hair was down, and she looked like someone who had nowhere particular to be, which James found vaguely suspicious, given that she had moved in less than 2 weeks ago, and presumably had an entire life to unpack and organize. "Morning," she said. "Morning. I wanted to say thank you again, for yesterday." It was a zipper. It was 20 minutes of me almost dislocating my shoulder, she said. Don't minimize your heroism. He almost smiled, stopped himself. How'd the latch turn out? Still broken. I keep meaning to look at it. I said I could fix it. You did say that. She looked at him steadily. You could come over and take a look if you wanted. I'll make actual coffee, not the paper cup kind. James looked at the pressure washer, then at the workshop, then against his better judgment at her. What kind of coffee? The kind that requires a grinder and an unreasonable amount of effort for a Tuesday morning. He set the washer down. Give me 10 minutes. He did not know why he said that. He was inside changing his shirt, which he also did not know why he did, before he'd finished processing the decision. He stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom for approximately 3 seconds, registered that he was standing in front of a mirror in his bathroom for reasons he could not adequately explain, and went back outside before the thought could develop further. Her kitchen was warm. That was the first thing. He didn't know what he had expected, bare walls, boxes, the temporary feel of a place that hadn't decided to be a home yet, but her kitchen was warm. There were plants on the windowsill above the sink, not decorative ones, but the kind that actually needed tending herbs, and something leafy that he didn't know the name of. There was a small stack of books on the counter next to the coffee maker spines, out well read by the look of them. The kind of books that had been opened many times. She was already at the grinder when he came in, and she pointed at the chair at the small table, without looking up, and he sat in it and watched her work. You didn't have to change your shirt, she said. He looked at her back. I had grease on the other one. Of course. He let that go. How long have you lived in New York? About 3 weeks counting this one. She measured beans with the particular concentration of someone who takes the process seriously. I was in Vermont before that a few years in Charlottesville. What brought you up here? She was quiet for a moment while the grinder ran. When it stopped, she said, I needed somewhere quieter, somewhere with a lake. She glanced back at him. Is that suspicious? I didn't say it was suspicious. You were thinking it. I wasn't. She turned back to the coffee maker. You were doing the thing where you file information and look like you're not filing information. James was quiet. What thing? The assessment. You've been doing it since I brought you coffee that first morning. She said it without accusation, without even particular interest, just as a statement of observed fact. It's okay, you were Navy. I'd be more concerned if you didn't do it. A specific silence filled the room. The kind that has weight. How do you know I was Navy? He said. She didn't answer immediately. She poured the water and pressed the button, and then turned around and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed, and looked at him with that expression again, the one he couldn't classify, and said, The Marina. I told you. The Marina told you I fix boats. People talk. In a week and a half. I ask good questions. He held her gaze. She didn't look away, didn't shift, didn't do any of the things people did when they were holding something back and feeling the pressure of it. She just looked at him the way she always looked at him, like the situation was entirely manageable, and she was not remotely concerned about where it was going. That's a lot of background on a neighbor you just met, he said. Is it? She turned back to pour the coffee. You probably know everything about me that's publicly available within a 20-mile radius. Don't tell me you haven't looked. He had. He had done exactly that the night before the socket set incident, and the search had returned exactly what you'd expect for a 41-year-old woman who had moved to a small town upstate, a LinkedIn with a gap in it, a previous address in Vermont. No red flags, no obvious story. Which was its own kind of information. You're a landscape consultant, he said. Was. She set a mug in front of him and sat down across the table. I consult now, but mostly remotely. I don't need to be anywhere specific. She wrapped her hands around her own mug. Which is why I could choose to be here. He looked at her. Why here specifically? She met his eyes over the rim of her mug. Lake Carver is beautiful. The town is quiet. The property was affordable. A beat. And I liked the idea of the neighborhood. You'd never been to this town before. No. So how did you know you'd like the neighborhood? She smiled then, slow and particular. Not the polite social smile, not the deflecting smile. The real one, the one that reached something behind her eyes and stayed there. "Good instincts," she said, and she took a sip of her coffee and looked out toward the lake and didn't say anything else about it, and James sat in her kitchen with his unreasonably good cup of coffee and turned that answer over in his hands like a piece of machinery he couldn't identify, and felt with absolute certainty that he was missing something significant. He fixed the latch before he left. 15 minutes, new strike plate, 2 screws reset at the correct angle. He showed her once how it worked. She tried it herself twice, said perfect, and then stood with her hand on the door, looking at him in the particular way she had of making ordinary moments feel like they were happening at slightly slower speed than the rest of the world. "Thank you, James." "It's a latch. It's a lot of things," she said quietly. And he didn't ask her what she meant by that, because he had a feeling the answer would require more than he currently had available. He went back across the property line and into his workshop, and stood at his workbench for a full minute without picking anything up. Then his phone buzzed. It was Noah's school early dismissal for a staff development day he had completely forgotten about. He was in the truck and pulling out of the driveway in 4 minutes, and he didn't have time to think about anything except pickup logistics and whether there was enough food in the house for dinner, which was how he preferred it. But when he pulled back in with Noah an hour later, there was a container on the wooden crate outside his workshop door. He opened it. Chicken soup still warm with a handwritten note tucked under the lid. "Heard he was sick earlier this week. R." James stood there holding the container in both hands. Noah appeared beside him, looked at the soup, looked at the note and said without a trace of irony, "She's really nice, Dad." "Yeah," James said. "Do you think she's lonely?" James looked at the house next door, at the warm kitchen window, at the plants on the sill visible even from here. "I don't know." "I don't think she seems lonely," Noah said thoughtfully. "She seems like she's exactly where she wants to be." He tugged James's sleeve. "Can we have the soup for dinner?" "Yeah, bud, we can have the soup." They went inside, and James heated the soup without consulting the note again, but he didn't throw it away either. He folded it carefully and put it in the drawer under the workbench next to the manual for the Starcraft's outboard motor and a photograph of Noah from the year before, and he didn't examine why he did that with any particular rigor. Some things you put somewhere safe before you know what they mean. 3 days passed. He saw her twice, once when she was loading things from her car, once when she waved from across the property as he was walking Noah to the bus stop. Both times he waved back. Both times she didn't manufacture a reason to extend it into something more, and both times he noticed that absence like a specific sound in a room that had just gone quiet. Gary called on Thursday. "How's the neighbor?" "Fine. Still bringing coffee. Every morning. And you're still pretending that's a totally ordinary thing that doesn't mean anything." James was quiet. "Tell me something," Gary said. "When's the last time somebody did something for you just because no angle, no reason, just because they felt like it?" James thought about the soup, the note, the coffee every morning before he had unlocked the workshop, the way she crouched down and actually listened to Noah talk about submarines. "A while," he said. "That's what I figured." Gary paused. "You know what your problem is. You've told me before. I'll tell you again. You're waiting for the catch. You've been waiting for the catch your whole life. With Dana you found it eventually, and it destroyed you. So now you've decided that if something feels good, there must be a catch you haven't found yet, and you'd rather spend your energy finding the catch than just—" He stopped. "Just letting it be good, James. You're getting philosophical. I'm getting accurate. There's a difference." James set his phone against his shoulder and looked out the workshop window at the light in her kitchen, already on, even though it was barely 6 in the morning. "She knows things she shouldn't know," he said. "Little things, about me, about Noah." "Like what?" "She knew I was Navy. She knew Noah had been sick. He paused. "She said she chose this neighborhood before she'd ever been here. She likes the idea of it." Gary was quiet for a moment. "So she did her homework before moving to a new town. People do that." "Not like this." "James." His brother's voice was careful now. "Is she doing anything wrong? Is she pushing you, making you uncomfortable, crossing any actual lines?" He thought about all of it. The coffee that stayed outside the workshop. The conversations that ended before they became too much. The way she had never once asked him about Dana, about the divorce, about any of the things that people always eventually asked about. "No," he said. "She's not doing anything wrong." "Then what's the problem?" James looked out the window. "I don't know what she wants." "Maybe," Gary said, "she's not ready to tell you yet, or maybe you're not ready to hear it." James didn't answer. He stayed on the line another few minutes, talking about nothing in particular, and then said goodbye and set the phone on the workbench and went back to the StarCraft, which needed him, which was uncomplicated, which made sense. Unlike everything else on his property line. He didn't know it then, but in 4 days, he was going to find out exactly what Renee Maddox wanted, and it was going to be the last thing he expected. Not because it was dangerous, not because it was wrong, but because it was going to require him to do the one thing James Calloway had never learned how to do: receive something he hadn't fixed first. 4 days turned out to be 2. James was under the StarCraft on a Saturday morning when he heard Noah's voice at a pitch he hadn't heard in a long time. Not scared, not hurt, but that particular high-register excitement that meant something had happened that exceeded his 7-year-old capacity to process quietly. He rolled out from under the hull before the second syllable of his name. Noah was standing in the workshop doorway holding a cardboard box with both arms breathing hard like he'd been running. "Dad! Dad! She's got a dog!" James sat up. "What?" "Renee. She's got a dog. It was in her car, she just brought it home. It's huge, Dad. It's like it's enormous. It's bigger than me, probably. Can I go see it? I just need to know if I can go." "What kind of dog?" "I don't know the big gray kind it's got. It looks like a wolf, but friendly. Can I? A Great Dane, maybe? Or a Weimaraner?" "Dad." Noah's entire body was communicating urgency. "Can I go see it?" James looked at the StarCraft. At the layup schedule he'd been trying to stick to for a week. At his son, who was vibrating at a frequency usually reserved for Christmas morning. "Go ask her first," he said. "Don't just run over there." Noah was already gone. James watched him go, that small figure sprinting across the yard, and felt something move through his chest. Some quiet, uncomplicated thing. He picked up the wrench and went back to work, and lasted about 6 minutes before he stood up, wiped his hands, and walked across the property line himself. He told himself it was to make sure Noah wasn't being a nuisance. The dog was a Weimaraner. Silver-gray, long-legged, serious-faced in the way the breed always was, like it had opinions and had considered when to share them. It was sitting beside Renee on the back porch steps with the particular dignity of a dog that knew its own worth, and Noah was in front of it on his knees, both hands buried in the loose skin at the dog's neck. Talking to it. The way he talked to things he loved steadily, a little breathlessly with complete conviction that the other party was following every word. Renee looked up when James came around the corner. "His name is Dozer," she said. "Of course it is. He's 4. He thinks he's a lapdog." She looked at Noah. "He also apparently thinks your son is the most interesting person he's encountered in months, which I respect, because Dozer has high standards." "Noah." James stopped a few feet back. "You're not bothering them." "He's great," Noah said without looking up. "Dad, he keeps leaning on me." "Why does he keep leaning on me?" "It means he likes you," Renee said. "Weimaraners lean on people they trust. It's a whole thing." Noah looked absolutely undone by this information. He leaned back into the dog's weight, and the dog adjusted, and they sat there together on the bottom step like two beings who had known each other for years and simply been separated by logistics until now. James stood watching it and felt that thing in his chest again, the quiet, uncomplicated thing, and this time he recognized it. It was grief. Old grief specifically. The kind that surfaces not when things go wrong, but when things go unexpectedly right. When you see your kid being happy in a way you didn't engineer, and you realize how long it's been since that happened without you having to make it happen. "You okay?" Renee said quietly. He looked at her. She was watching him the way she sometimes did, with that particular calibrated attention, not intrusive, just present. Like she wasn't going to pretend she hadn't noticed. "Fine," he said. She didn't call him on it. She just moved over slightly on the step and said, "Sit down if you want. There's room." He almost didn't. Then he did. They sat on her back porch steps side by side and watched Noah and Dozer conduct their new relationship with full seriousness, and for a while, nobody said anything, and James found with something close to alarm that the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists between people who don't need to fill space. He hadn't had that with anyone in a long time. He had forgotten it existed. "When did you get him?" he asked. 3 years ago, after a bad year." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. "He's been everywhere with me. Vermont, Charlottesville. He adapts well. Good quality in a dog. Good quality in anyone." She was watching Noah scratch behind Dozer's ears. "Noah doesn't talk much about his mom." It wasn't a question. James looked at his hands. "No, he doesn't. He talks about you a lot, though. What you fix, what you know about engines, how you can tell what's wrong with a boat just by the sound it makes in the water." A pause. "He's proud of you." James didn't answer right away. The information settled on him the way information sometimes did, not cleanly, not easily, but with the weight of something that had been true for a while and was only now being handed to him directly. "He doesn't say that to me," he said finally. "Kids rarely say the thing directly," Renee said. "They demonstrate it. You just have to know how to read it." He turned to look at her. "You know a lot about kids for someone who—" He stopped. She looked at him calmly. "For someone who doesn't have any—" "I was going to say, for someone who just moved in." "Sure you were." But she said it without edge. "I taught for 6 years, elementary school before I moved to consulting. 3rd grade mostly." She paused. "It changes how you listen to them. You stop waiting for the point, and you start hearing what they're actually telling you." Something shifted in James's understanding. Small, but significant, like a compass needle settling. It explained things. The way she crouched down, the way she waited for Noah to finish his sentences, the submarine's conversation. He filed it away with everything else he was accumulating and tried to decide what to do with the growing stack. "Why did you stop teaching?" he asked. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "Because I wanted something I couldn't have in a classroom." She looked out toward the lake, not at him. "I wanted to build something that lasted more than a school year." Her voice was even, carefully even the way voices got when they were managing something real underneath. "I kept starting over every September with a new set of kids, and every June I had to let them go and start counting down to the next September, and I couldn't do it anymore. I needed to put something down and leave it there." James listened to that, really listened. "And landscape consulting let you do that?" She smiled just slightly. "It turns out people care very much about what they put in the ground and what stays." She turned back to look at him. "You understand that. I fix boats. You fix things people gave up on," she said. "That's not the same as just fixing boats. You choose the ones that look like they're past it. You could take easier work. You don't." He looked at her. "How do you know what work I take?" "Peterson talked to Kim down the road. Kim mentioned it to Dorothy." She paused. "Small town. That's a very specific chain of information for someone who's been here 2 weeks. I told you, I ask good questions." She held his gaze. "And I pay attention to the answers." He should have let it go. He had told himself at least 4 times since the coffee first appeared on his doorstep that some things were better left as the comfortable surface they presented and didn't need examination. But he was sitting on her porch steps in the pale morning sun with her dog and his son, and that specific quality of quiet between them that he hadn't felt in years. And something in him that was tired of not asking finally spoke. "Renee." He said her name carefully. "Why here?" The real answer. She didn't look away. She didn't smile the way she did when she was deflecting that calm, slightly amused deflection that he had started to recognize as her version of a change of subject. She looked at him with the kind of steadiness that meant she had been waiting for this question and had already decided how much to answer. "I'll tell you," she said, "but not today." "Why not today?" "Because you're not ready for it today." She said it without condescension, like a doctor stating a dosage. "And I'm not going to say it before you are because that's a waste of both our time." James stared at her. "You don't know what I'm ready for." "I have a pretty good idea." "That's—" He stopped. Start it again. That's an arrogant thing to say. Probably. She did not apologize for it. But I'd rather be honest with you than polite. I've found that polite takes longer and doesn't actually get anywhere. He sat with that for a moment. The dog had settled its enormous head on Noah's lap, and Noah was running his fingers along its ears with the hypnotized focus of a child who had found exactly the right thing to do with his hands. The sun was moving across the yard. Somewhere on the lake, a motorboat started up, cut out, started again. "You're a strange woman," James said. "I'm a straightforward woman," she said. "People find that strange sometimes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Noah's going to ask if Dozer can come over to our yard. I know. And you're going to say yes, obviously. And then he's going to ask if Dozer can come over every day. Probably. And you'll say yes to that too." She looked at him steadily. Is that a problem? He thought about it. Really thought about it the way he should have been thinking about all of it from the beginning. Not what it might mean. Not what the angle was. Not what the catch was. Just the actual, observable fact of the question in front of him. "No," he said. "It's not a problem." She nodded like that was settled. Noah looked up from Dozer's ears and said, "Dad, can Dozer come over to our yard?" "Yeah, bud." "Every day." James looked at Renee. She was looking at the lake. "We'll figure it out." That evening he called Gary. He didn't plan to. He was washing dishes after dinner, and Noah was in the living room doing homework with a seriousness that James suspected had something to do with wanting to finish, so he could talk more about Dozer, and James found himself picking up his phone before he'd made a conscious decision. "She said she'd tell me why she came here," he said when Gary picked up skipping hello entirely. "But not yet. She said I wasn't ready." Gary was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, "I like her." "I haven't told you anything about her." "You've told me plenty. She's not chasing you. She's not performing. She just said a direct, true thing to a stubborn man who has been actively looking for reasons to keep his distance for 2 weeks, and she said it without apologizing for it." Gary paused. "I like her enormously. She's hiding something. She's timing something. There's a difference, James." "How is that different?" "Hiding is when you don't want someone to know. Timing is when you want them to be ready." Gary's voice went quieter. "You've been not ready for 3 years. Since Dana left. You've been walking around that workshop in that town, fixing everybody else's broken things, and not letting a single person fix anything of yours, and now there's a woman next door who—" He stopped. "What did she actually say?" "Exactly." James thought about it. "I'd rather be honest with you than polite. She said polite takes longer and doesn't get anywhere." "Lord," Gary said. "Marry her." "Gary, I'm not joking. Not right now, I'm not." James turned off the faucet and stood at the kitchen window looking at the light in her kitchen. On as always. That warm, steady light. "She knows things she shouldn't know," he said again, but it came out different this time. Not like a warning. More like a fact he was still working out what to do with. "About me. Things the Marina wouldn't tell her. Things Dorothy Pierce wouldn't know. So ask her about it." "I tried. She said she'd tell me when I was ready." "Then get ready," Gary said simply. "I know that sounds like nothing, but I mean it. Stop auditing her, and start asking yourself why you're so determined to find the problem before you've even let yourself see if there's something good." After he hung up, James stood at the window a while longer. The light in her kitchen didn't go out until almost 10. He wasn't watching for it. He just happened to be there when it did, standing at his own kitchen window, with his hands around a mug of tea that had gone cold, thinking about a woman who said honest things without apology, and a dog that leaned into the people it trusted, and a son who was proud of him in ways he never said out loud. He was missing something. He knew that. There was a piece of the picture he didn't have yet, and some part of him, the part that had spent 2 decades reading situations for hidden variables, for the thing nobody was saying, for the detail that changed the whole meaning of what you thought you were looking at. That part was very quietly beginning to understand that when that piece arrived, nothing was going to look quite the same. He just didn't know yet how far back it went. He rinsed his mug, checked on Noah, who was asleep with the light still on, and a library book open on his chest with a page-long passage about Weimaraners that he had apparently looked up before bed. James set the book on the nightstand and turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to his son breathe. She knows things she shouldn't know. He had been saying it like it was a problem. Standing there in the quiet dark of his son's room, listening to the lake settle outside and the night find its rhythm. James Calloway began slowly, reluctantly, with the specific resistance of a man whose trust has been broken at great cost, to consider the possibility that it wasn't a problem at all, that it was in fact the whole point, and that somewhere in the answer to why here was an answer to a question he hadn't yet been brave enough to ask himself. He found it on a Tuesday, not because he went looking. That was the part he kept coming back to afterward. He hadn't gone looking. He had been cleaning out the storage shelf above his workbench, the one he hadn't touched in 2 years, because it was full of old manuals and invoices and the accumulated paper debris of a life that had been too busy or too tired to sort through it. And he had pulled down a box of miscellaneous files, and 3 things had fallen out onto the floor. A birthday card from Noah, age 5, that said, "I love you, Dad," in crayon with a drawing of a boat that looked more like a hat. A photograph of James on the deck of the USS Monterey, 22 years old, squinting into the Pacific sun with the particular expression of a man who doesn't know yet what's coming and is fine with that. And a magazine, not a recent one. The cover was sun-faded, and the spine was cracked, the kind of wear that came from being read multiple times and stored and taken out and read again. Coastal Living from 9 years ago. He almost set it on the discard pile without opening it. Then something made him flip it over. There was a yellow sticky note on the back cover. Not his handwriting. Neat loop, the handwriting of someone who had been taught cursive and had kept it. This is the one, page 34. He opened to page 34. The article was about a man who had restored a destroyed 1962 Chris Craft that everyone in the marina had told him to scrap. 3 columns, 2 photographs. The restoration had taken 18 months. The man in the photographs was younger, leaner, wearing a navy base cap pushed back on his head and looking at the camera with the slightly surprised expression of someone who had just been told they were worth photographing. The man was James Calloway. He sat down on the wooden crate. He read the article. He remembered the reporter, young woman, late 20s, had shown up at his bay at the Virginia Beach Marina on a Thursday and asked if she could write about the boat, because her editor had heard about it from someone at the base. He had said yes, mostly because he had been too busy to think of a good reason to say no. He had forgotten about it almost immediately after. He didn't know it had ever been published. He had never seen the finished piece. He read it twice. Then he looked at the sticky note again. This is the one. The handwriting was Renee's. He didn't know how he was certain of that before he'd even consciously compared it to anything, but he was. The same neat loops on the L in this. The same way the period at the end was slightly heavy, like she pressed down when she was making a decision. He sat on that crate for a long time. The workshop was quiet around him. Outside, he could hear Dozer moving around in Renee's yard, the particular soft sound of large paws on dry grass. And somewhere past that, Noah's school bus making its afternoon route 3 streets over. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a Tuesday in a life that had been until approximately 4 minutes ago, reasonably uncomplicated. He picked up his phone and called Gary. It went to voicemail. He set the phone down, picked it up again. Then he set it down, picked up the magazine, and walked across the property line. She answered the door before he knocked. She must have seen him coming through the kitchen window. She opened the door and looked at him, and then looked at the magazine in his hand, and something moved through her expression. Not fear, not guilt exactly, but the specific look of a person who has been expecting a conversation and is now having it earlier than anticipated. She stepped back. "Come in." He came in. He set the magazine on her kitchen table, sticky note up, and stood back and looked at her and waited. She looked at the magazine for a long moment. Then she sat down at the table, which was either an invitation or a necessity, and she folded her hands in front of her and said, "Where did you find it?" "Storage shelf. It fell out of a box." He remained standing. "It's your handwriting?" "Yes." "It's 9 years old?" "Yes." He put his hands on the back of the chair across from her, but didn't sit. "How long have you had it?" She looked up at him. "Since it was published." The number landed. James worked it through. 9 years ago, he had been stationed at Virginia Beach, recently promoted 3 years from meeting Dana, entirely unaware that anyone had photographed him next to a resurrected Chris Craft and written 3 columns about what it meant. 9 years ago, Renee Maddox would have been, he did the quick math, 32 years old. Teaching 3rd grade in Charlottesville. Reading a magazine she had picked up somewhere, and finding a story about a man restoring a broken boat and thinking for reasons he could not yet understand. This is the one. What does that mean? He said. The note. This is the one. She was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, he had learned the difference by now. Just measuring. Choosing the right door into a room that had a lot of them. When I was teaching, she said, I used to read to my class every Friday afternoon. Whatever I was reading that week, I'd pick a passage, something that felt true, and I'd read it out loud. Not to teach them anything, just to share it. She paused. I started doing it with articles too. Things I came across that felt like they were about something real, something underneath the surface thing. I kept a folder. I called it the This is the One folder. Because every time I found something, I'd think that's the one. That's the thing that says what I've been trying to say. And the article about me was in that folder. Yes. For 9 years. Yes. He pulled the chair out and sat down. He needed to sit down. Renee. That's... He stopped. He was a precise man, a man who chose words carefully, and knew the difference between what something was and what it looked like, and he needed to be precise now. That's a significant amount of time to carry a magazine article about a stranger. I know. What did you think it meant when you cut it out? She looked at her folded hands. I thought it meant that somewhere there was a man who understood that broken things were worth saving, even when everyone else had given up on them. And that kind of person was rare. She looked up. I thought it was just an observation. A thing I appreciated in the abstract. I kept it the way you keep something that reminds you of what matters. And then, she took a breath. And then 6 years later I read that the same man, because I had looked you up over the years just to see the way you track someone you've always found interesting, was going through a divorce in upstate New York. That he had a small son. That he was working at a lake marina and living a very quiet, very closed-off life. She paused. And I had just left teaching. And I had Dozer. And I had no particular reason to be anywhere specific. He stared at her. So you moved here? Not immediately. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't completely still. I spent a year thinking about it, telling myself it was an absurd idea, that I would be inserting myself into someone's life based on a magazine article and some internet research, and a feeling I couldn't rationally justify. But you did it anyway. Yes. Why? She looked at him directly. Because I had been waiting 15 years for someone who understood that the broken version of something is still worth everything. Not in spite of the damage, but because of what it tells you about the thing's original quality. And I was 40 years old, and I was tired of waiting. And I decided that the worst possible outcome was that I'd move to a nice town by a lake and make a neighbor uncomfortable, and I could live with that. James sat with this. The kitchen was very quiet. Dozer was at the back door pressing his nose against the glass, leaving fog. The clock above the stove said 4:17. Noah would be off the bus in about 20 minutes. You could have just introduced yourself, he said, like a normal person. I did introduce myself. After moving here based on a 9-year-old magazine article. The introduction was still genuine. He looked at her. Was any of it the coffee, the latch, the soup, was any of it not planned? She didn't hesitate. All of it was genuine. None of it was scripted. Her voice was firm on this, the firmest he had heard her. I planned to move here. I did not plan what happened after. I don't control how people respond to kindness. I just did what came naturally and hoped. That's a meaningful distinction to you. It's the most meaningful distinction I can think of. She leaned forward slightly. James, I knew who you were before I came here. I did not know who you were going to be to me. That part was real. Every single day of it. He got up. He couldn't sit anymore. He walked to the kitchen window and stood there looking out at the yard at Dozer, now lying down in a patch of afternoon sun with his chin on his paws. He thought about Dana. About the way that marriage had ended, not in a single catastrophic moment, but in a long, slow unwinding, like a rope that had been under too much load for too long, fraying strand by strand, until one day there was nothing left to hold. He thought about the way he had felt afterward. Not heartbroken, so much as confirmed. As if some part of him had always suspected that trust was a structural defect, a vulnerability you built into yourself and then paid for eventually. When Dana left, he said, still looking out the window, "She told me I had never let her in, that I was always assessing, always looking for the problem before it showed up. She said she felt like she was living with a man who was always 3 steps ahead in the argument, who had already decided what her motives were before she explained them." He paused. She wasn't entirely wrong. Renee didn't say anything. "And then you show up," he said, "and I find out you've been not watching. That's not right, but you've been aware of me for 9 years. You chose to move here. You knew details before I told you. And I should be—" He turned around. "By every measure of how I operate, I should be shutting this down right now. I should be furious. I should be saying this is exactly what I was afraid of." She met his eyes. "Are you furious?" He looked at her for a long moment. At this woman who had told him direct, true things from the beginning, and had never once asked for more than he was offering, and had sat on her back porch steps and watched his son fall in love with her dog, and said, "I'd rather be honest with you than polite, like it was just the obvious way to live." "No," he said. "I'm not furious." "What are you?" He sat back down. He picked up the magazine, looked at his own face in the photograph, 22 years younger, sun squinting, not yet knowing what was coming. "I'm trying to figure out what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything with it right now." "I know, that's not—" He set the magazine down. "The thing that gets me isn't that you came here. I think I can understand that. It's that you never said anything. 3 weeks. You watched me try to figure you out. You saw me running every assessment I know and you just waited," she said. "Yes, because," she said carefully, "if I had told you on day 3, you would have left, not physically, but you would have closed off so completely that this conversation wouldn't be possible for years, if ever." She held his gaze. "You know that's true." He did know that. He hated that he knew it. "So you decided when I was ready," he said, and it came out slightly raw. "You decided that. You found the magazine, James. I didn't hand it to you." Her voice was gentle, but it didn't bend. "I was going to tell you. This week. I had already decided. But I didn't engineer the timing of you cleaning your storage shelf." He looked at the magazine, at the sticky note, at 9 years of a woman carrying a piece of paper that said, "This is the one about a man who hadn't known she existed." "What did you think was going to happen?" he said. "When you came here, what did you actually think?" She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that he didn't think she was going to answer. Then she said, "I thought I was going to meet a man worth knowing. I thought it might go nowhere, and I'd have a nice town and a good neighbor. I thought it might go somewhere and I'd have—" She stopped. When she continued, her voice was quieter. "I thought I might finally stop keeping that magazine in a folder marked, 'This is the one,' and actually find out what that meant in real life. Not the idea of it. The actual thing." James sat in her kitchen and looked at this woman who had done something that by any rational standard was extraordinary, who had followed a feeling across years and state lines, and reasonable objection, and just shown up, not demanding, not performing, not asking for anything except the chance to find out if the thing she'd felt for 9 years was real, or just a story she'd been telling herself. And something inside him, something that had been locked and corroded and long given up on, like the bilge of a bad boat, shifted. Not open, not yet, but shifted. "I need to get Noah from the bus stop," he said. "I know." He stood up, picked up the magazine, then set it back down on her table. He wasn't sure why, but it felt like it belonged there, like it had always been hers. At the door he stopped, turned back. "Renee." She looked up. "For the record," he said, "I'm still angry, not at you. I'm angry that it took me this long and that I—" He stopped, started differently. "I'm going to need some time." "I know," she said, "and I'm probably going to be difficult." "I know that too. And I still have approximately 47 questions." She almost smiled. "I'll make coffee," He nodded once and walked out, and behind him he heard Dozer scratch at the back door to be let in, and her footsteps crossing the kitchen and the small domestic sound of a door opening. He walked across the property line, across his yard, past his workshop, where the Starcraft sat, half repaired on its stand, and he stood at the street and waited for the bus. When it came, Noah jumped off the bottom step and immediately said, "Is Dozer out? Can we go see Dozer?" "In a bit," James said. Noah looked up at him, looked at his face. 7 years old, but those gray eyes that were his mother's had always read James better than James wanted to admit. "Are you okay, Dad?" "Yeah." He put his hand on the back of his son's neck. "Yeah, I'm okay." They walked up the driveway together. James looked at the house next door at the kitchen window where the light was already on, even though it was barely past 5, and he thought about a woman sitting at a table with a magazine she had carried for 9 years. And he thought about a man in a photograph who had been restoring a broken thing and hadn't known anyone was watching. He thought about what it meant that she had watched, that she had waited, that she had shown up anyway. He thought about what Gary had said. Stop looking for the catch. Let it be good. He thought about the sticky note. This is the one. He didn't know yet what he was going to do. He didn't know if what she had done was something he could set down next to everything else and just let be what it was. He didn't know if the man he had become careful armored 3 steps ahead and already braced for the argument was still capable of walking into something without auditing it to death first. But he knew one thing. He had put the magazine back on her table. And for James Calloway, who held on to broken things longer than most men could manage, that was not a small act. That was the beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet. He didn't sleep again that night, but it was different from before. The other sleepless nights had been restless mind-running assessments, cataloging variables, searching for the problem he hadn't found yet. This one was still. He lay on his back in the dark and looked at the ceiling and let the facts arrange themselves without trying to control where they landed. Renee Maddox had read an article about him 9 years ago. She had kept it. She had watched from a distance, not obsessively, not intrusively, but the way you watch a light in a window when you're walking alone at night. Not taking anything, just noting that it was there, that it was warm, that it meant someone was home. And then his life had fallen apart, and she had decided that distance was no longer the right answer. He turned that over for a long time. The thing he kept returning to, the thing he couldn't argue himself out of no matter how many times he tried to frame it as a violation, or a manipulation, or any of the other words that would have made it simpler, was the coffee. The way it appeared every morning outside his workshop door without ceremony, without expectation, without any requirement that he acknowledge it, or be grateful for it, or become someone different in response to it. The way she had never once pushed through a door he hadn't opened. The way she had told him directly, and without apology, that she would explain when he was ready, and then had simply waited for him to become ready. He had been with Dana for 11 years, and she had never once waited for him. That wasn't blame. He understood now, with the clarity that only comes when enough time has passed, that the marriage had required 2 people to fail it, and he had contributed his full share. But the contrast sat there in the dark, and was impossible to ignore. The way Renee's particular brand of patience was not passive. It was not the patience of someone who didn't have opinions. It was the patience of someone who had decided that his pace was worth respecting. At 2 in the morning, he got up and went to the workshop. Not to work. He just sat on the crate and looked at the Starcraft and breathed. The Chris Craft in the article had taken him 18 months. Everyone at the marina had told him to scrap it. The hull had been compromised below the waterline, the engine was seized, the woodwork was warped and split from years of neglect. He had started anyway, not because he was certain it could be done, because something in the original bones of the thing, the quality of the craftsmanship underneath all the damage, had told him it was worth finding out. He sat in the quiet workshop and understood, sitting there at 2 in the morning, that a woman 41 years old had read an article about that boat and had thought the same thing about the man who fixed it. He went back inside, lay down, closed his eyes. This time, he slept. He knocked on her door the next morning before the coffee appeared. It was 6:20. Early even by his standards, early enough that he half expected her to take a minute to come to the door in a robe with her hair loose, and that slightly unguarded expression people have before they've assembled themselves for the day. Instead, she opened the door, immediately fully dressed, coffee already in hand, and looked at him with an expression that was neither surprised nor smug. Just present. "You're early," she said. "I have 47 questions," he said. "I thought I should start." She stepped back and let him in. They sat at her kitchen table, and the coffee was already made, and Dozer came over and put his chin on James's knee, without asking, which James had started to understand was simply the dog's way of registering a vote. He put his hand on the dog's head without thinking about it. "Ask," she said. "How much do you know specifically? What did you actually find out about me before you came here?" She didn't flinch from the directness. "Your Navy record is partly public rank service dates commendations. The article gave me Virginia Beach, the marina's name. From there, some things were just local knowledge, once I started asking around Deering Falls before I moved." She paused. "I knew you were divorced. I knew you had a son. I knew you'd been here about 2 years. I knew your reputation at the marina." She looked at him steadily. "I did not read your mail. I did not talk to Dana. I did not hire anyone. It was all surface-level information that any curious person with internet access and a few phone calls could find. But most curious people don't move across state lines because of it." "No," she agreed. "They don't." "So why did you?" She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Because I was 40 years old and I had spent my entire adult life being careful, being reasonable, waiting for the right circumstances to align in the right order. And I had that magazine in a folder for 9 years, and every time I opened the folder, I thought that man understands something about value that most people don't. That broken things have worth, that the effort of repair is itself a form of love." She looked at him. "And I thought, what if I just went, what's the worst thing that happens? I move somewhere beautiful and it doesn't work, and I have a good lake view and an interesting neighbor. And if it did work," she looked at him for a long moment, "then I'd have stopped waiting for my life to begin." James sat with that. "That's a lot of weight to put on a stranger." "You weren't a stranger. You were someone I'd been thinking about for 9 years. She shook her head. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like something I should be more alarmed by than I am." "Are you alarmed?" He thought about it honestly. "No. And I've been trying to figure out why not. Because I should be. By every protocol, I know I should be treating this as—" He stopped. "But I keep coming back to the same thing. You never pretended. You never manufactured who you were. Everything you showed me was real, even when I didn't know the full context of it." "Yes," she said quietly. "That's exactly right." "The coffee was real." "Yes." "The soup was real." "Yes." "The zipper was—" He stopped. The corner of his mouth moved almost involuntarily. "The zipper was actually stuck. James, I was 20 minutes from calling Dorothy Pierce, and that woman cannot keep a secret. The zipper was absolutely actually stuck." He looked at her. She was almost smiling. He was almost smiling. And something in the space between those two almost smiles was warmer than anything he had felt in a very long time. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to just let me say it without—" He gestured vaguely. "Without the calm." She raised an eyebrow. "You want me to be less calm?" "I want you to just listen." She nodded, folded her hands, waited. After Dana left, he said, "I made a decision. Not consciously, not in words, but in the way you make the decisions that actually stick in your behavior, in your habits, in what you let yourself want. I decided that I was not going to be someone who needed anything from anyone. That the safest possible version of my life was the one where I provided everything and required nothing, and made myself so sufficient that the absence of another person could never hollow me out again." He paused. "And it worked. For 2 years it worked perfectly. Noah was okay. The work was good. The town was quiet. Nothing happened that I couldn't handle alone. Renee was very still. And then you showed up," he said, "with your coffee and your calm and your dog and your completely insane 9-year backstory, and you didn't ask me for anything. You didn't need me to be different. You didn't need me to open up on a schedule or perform recovery or be further along than I was." He stopped. "Do you understand how disorienting that is for a man who has spent 2 years making sure he doesn't need anything?" "Tell me," she said softly. It is the most terrifying thing that has happened to me since my divorce. He said it plainly, without drama. Because I can defend against need. I'm very good at defending against need. I am completely unprepared to defend against someone who simply waits, who shows up every day and asks for nothing, and makes the space around them so livable that you find yourself breathing differently just from being near them. Renee looked at him, and her eyes were bright, and she didn't say anything for a moment. I'm not fixed, he said. I need you to know that. I'm not. I've got a lot of damage still in places I haven't fully assessed yet, and I don't know how long that takes, and I can't promise a timeline. James? And I have a 7-year-old who has already had one person leave, and I am not going to let him get attached to a situation that James. Her voice was firm and gentle at the same time, a combination he had only ever heard from her. I didn't come here for a fixed man. I came here for that one. She pointed at the magazine on the table between them, the 9-year-old article with the sun-faded cover and the sticky note that said, "This is the one." The one who looks at something everyone else gave up on and says no. This is still worth it. This still has value. I'm going to find out what it can be. She held his gaze. That's who I came here for. Not a finished version. The actual one. The kitchen was very quiet. Dozer shifted his chin on James's knee and sighed deeply, the specific sigh of a dog who feels that the humans in the room are being unnecessarily slow about things. He agrees with me, Renee said. He's a dog. He's an excellent judge of character. James looked down at the dog, then back at her. I don't know how to do this. I want to be clear about that. I know how to fix things, and I know how to protect things, and I know how to maintain a perimeter, and I know how to... He stopped. I do not know how to be on the receiving end. Of this. Of someone deciding I'm worth... He couldn't finish it. I know, she said. I watched you figure that out in real time for 3 weeks. The coffee, the latch, the soup, every time I did something, I watched you try to find the invoice for it. The thing you owed me in return. The way to make it an exchange instead of a gift. He looked at her. Because gifts have catches. Not always. In my experience, I know. She reached across the table and put her hand on his, not grasping, just there. I'm not asking you to believe that overnight. I'm asking you to let me keep showing you, over time, without a deadline. He looked at her hand on his. He thought about Noah saying she seems like she's exactly where she wants to be. He thought about Gary saying, let it be good, James. He thought about lying on his back in the dark at 2 a.m, and understanding finally that the quality of the original thing underneath all the damage was exactly what had made the restoration worth attempting. He turned his hand over under hers. Okay, he said, just that. Just the one word. But the way he said it, not resigned, not careful, not pre-braced for the argument, was different from the way he had said anything in a very long time. It was the voice of a man who had, just for the first time in years, decided not to audit the situation before entering it. She squeezed his hand once. Then she let go and stood up and refilled both their mugs and sat back down and said, Now, you said 47 questions. You've asked approximately 4. We should keep going, or you'll never get to work. He almost laughed. The sound surprised him came out before he could measure it. You're going to manage the agenda now. Someone has to. You're very thorough, but you're not efficient. She pushed his mug toward him. Ask. He asked. She answered. Some things she answered completely, and some things she answered partially, and 2 things she said she'd tell him later when she could explain them properly, and both times he nodded and filed it and didn't push. They sat at her kitchen table until 7:40, when James looked at the clock and said, Noah, and stood up, and they both walked to the front door, and he went across the property line to wake up his son. Noah came to breakfast already talking. He had apparently had a dream about Dozer navigating a submarine, which he presented as evidence that his original submarine theory deserved more serious consideration. James made eggs and listened and said, in the appropriate places, and drove him to school, and came back and went to the workshop and stood in front of the StarCraft for a long time. Then he picked up his tools and went back to work. Not because things were resolved. Not because the damage was repaired, or the questions were all answered, or the future had clarified itself into something he could navigate with confidence. None of that was true. He was still a man with significant structural damage in places he hadn't fully reached yet. He was still going to be difficult. He was still going to run assessments when he should have been breathing in pre-brace for arguments that weren't coming, and occasionally mistake patience for strategy. But he picked up his tools and went to work because that was what he knew how to do. And now, for the first time in 2 years, he was doing it in a life that had something in it that hadn't been there before. Something warm and steady and entirely unconcerned with whether he was ready for it on any particular schedule. At 10 o'clock, the coffee appeared on the wooden crate outside the workshop door. He came out, picked it up, and looked next door. She was at her kitchen window. She raised her own mug. He raised his back. He went inside and got to work. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in late April, the Starcraft was finished. James had been working on it for 6 weeks total, longer than it should have taken, but the transom had required more reconstruction than the initial assessment had suggested, and he didn't believe in rushing a hull repair. He brought Peterson in to see it, and the man walked around it twice without saying anything, and then said, "It looks better than when I bought it," which James considered an accurate and sufficient review. After Peterson left, Noah came to the workshop and stood looking at the boat with his hands in his pockets, the way he sometimes stood when he was thinking about something that hadn't fully formed yet. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Do you think it knows it's fixed?" James looked at the boat, at the repaired transom, the reseated hull, the recaulked seams, at all the places where the damage had been real and the repair was real, and the two things existed together in the finished object without pretending either had not happened. "I don't think boats know things. But if it did..." He thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "I think it would know." Noah nodded, satisfied, and went back outside to find Dozer. James stood alone in his workshop for a moment. Then he walked next door. Renee was on the back porch with her book Dozer sprawled across her feet in the absolute commitment of a dog who has claimed a person as a permanent resting place. She looked up when James came around the corner. She looked at his face. She set the book down. "The boat's done," he said. "How does it look?" "Good." He sat down on the step beside her. "Better than when it came in." She nodded. She didn't say anything else. She picked her book back up, and Dozer redistributed his weight to include James's feet as well, and they sat there in the late April morning while the lake moved and the light moved, and Noah's voice came from somewhere in the yard where he was conducting an ongoing monologue to an audience of one very attentive Weimaraner. James Calloway had spent 2 years making himself sufficient, making himself so complete and self-contained that nothing could get in or out without his permission, and he had been good at it, and it had cost him things he was only beginning to count. But sitting on that porch step with the sun on the lake, and his son's voice in the yard, and a woman beside him who had carried a piece of paper for 9 years, not because she needed him to be something, but because she had recognized something real from a distance, and had been patient enough to walk toward it. Sitting there, he felt the last of the long-held vigilance release. Not all at once. Not permanently, because that was not how damage worked, and he was realistic about that. But enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to stop auditing the moment for its hidden costs. He had fixed the broken boat. He had not expected to find out that the whole time he was also the broken boat. And that someone had already decided 9 years ago that he was worth every hour of the work.